Ever feel like, I don't know, like you're just stuck on a treadmill, working harder and harder, but going nowhere? Like the deck is stacked against you, the whole system.
Yeah.
Well, you're not alone. That's a question, honestly, that people have been wrestling with for centuries.
Right.
And leads us to this week's deep dive. We're tackling the ideas of Karl Marx.
Okay.
Now, hold on. Before you tune out thinking, oh, this is just some dusty old philosophy lecture, I promise you this is anything but irrelevant.
Yeah. No, it's true.
We're taking that article you sent, the one on like understanding Marxism, and we're going to unpack why this is bubbling up everywhere these days, why people are talking about it.
Right. Yeah.
So we're diving headfirst into Marxism, and not like the buzzwords, but the actual core of what he was saying.
Yeah. The actual ideas.
What's fascinating, and the article touches on this, is that Marx wasn't just theorizing from some ivory tower, you know.
Right. Right.
He was writing during the Industrial Revolution. It was a time of just massive, massive social change.
Huge upheaval. Exactly. Imagine like cities choked with smog, factories running nonstop, and this stark divide between, the factory owners and the workers. That was Marx's reality,
Yeah.
The air he breathed.
And the article paints like a very vivid picture of that in the intro, really setting the stage.
Oh, for sure.
So let's cut to the chase. What was the fundamental problem that Marx was trying to solve?
Well, he saw this inherent conflict at the heart of capitalism, this tension between the people who own what he called the means of production and those who work for them. Now, keep in mind, back in Marx's time, means of production, that meant like those giant factories,
Right.
and the machines inside them, the actual physical stuff.
Okay.
But that phrase, it's important.
So if we fast forward to today, right? What are the means of production in our modern world?
Well, that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And that's where it gets even more interesting, I think, because today it's less about like physical factories, right?
Yeah.
It's about who controls things like, well, technology, data, even, algorithms.
Oh, interesting.
Right. Think about the power of these big tech companies.
Yeah.
The influence of social media giants. They're the ones holding all the cards, right, in this information age.
Now, instead of like factories and machines, it's the whole digital infrastructure we all rely on.
Exactly. You got it. It's a huge shift. But the core tension that Marx was talking about, that power dynamic between those who control these essential resources, whatever they might be, and those who don't, well, that's what still resonates today, right?
It's more relevant than ever.
And Marx had a name for this, right? He called it surplus value. This idea that workers are creating more value with their labor than they're actually being compensated for.
Okay, I've heard that term, but I'm not sure I fully get it.
Okay, so think about it like this. You're an Uber driver, right? You're putting in the hours on the road, you're dealing with traffic, you're maintaining your car.
Yeah.
But a big chunk of each fare, that goes straight back to Uber, to the platform. They connected you to the rider, sure, but you're the one doing the work.
Right.
That, my friend, is surplus value in action.
Wow, that Uber analogy really makes it click.
Yeah.
So Marx basically saw capitalism as being built on this fundamental imbalance, this kind of baked-in inequality.
That's it in a nutshell. He believed that this system, by its very nature, creates that gap between the haves and the have-nots.
Okay, so we've established, I think, that Marx wasn't exactly capitalism's biggest fan.
Right. Understatement.
But the article you sent, it doesn't just like scratch the surface. It really dives into 4 really specific problems he saw with this whole system.
Yeah.
Should we unpack those a bit?
Let's do it. Let's unpack.
Yeah.
So problem number 1, and it's something we've already sort of touched on, is exploitation.
Right.
Marx argued that workers are just inherently disadvantaged under capitalism. Like, their very livelihood depends on wages, right? And that gives those who control the means of production, all that stuff we were talking about, the power to pay workers less than the value they actually generate.
Oof, yeah. It's like that old saying, the rich get richer. And
Well, Marx would probably say it's more like the rich get richer off the backs of the workers.
Right.
He was not mincing words. And he argued this creates a system where, honestly, workers are trapped,
Yeah.
stuck in this cycle of just trying to survive, while the owners, the capitalists, they're the ones who profit.
It's a tough cycle to break.
For sure.
And that brings us to his second big problem with capitalism, right? Alienation. I feel like this one is super relevant today.
Oh, absolutely. Because when you separate people from the actual fruits of their labor, like when work becomes solely about earning a wage just to live, to survive, it creates this sense of alienation, right? You're not building something, you're not creating, you're just a cog in the machine.
It's like when you're stuck in a job and you're just pushing papers all day, you totally lose sight of the bigger picture, why you're even there.
Exactly.
You're just going through the motions. Is that kind of what Marx was getting at?
100%. And think about how technology might actually be amplifying that sense of alienation even more these days.
Oh, interesting.
Right. Algorithms are telling us what to do. Automation's replacing jobs left and right. It's easy to feel like, well, I'm just a replaceable part.
Yeah, not a great feeling. Okay, so we've got exploitation, we've got alienation, and then there's problem number 3, right? Inequality.
And this wasn't some, like, unfortunate side effect for Marx. He saw it as, like, the feature, not the bug. Remember, surplus value. All that extra value the worker is creating. He argued that this naturally leads to a concentration of wealth and therefore power in the hands of just a few.
Which is something I think we can all relate to, especially these days. The gap between like the super rich and everyone else is just bananas.
It's wild. And it's not just about personal wealth, right? It's about power.
Yeah.
Because the more money, the more resources a small group has, the more influence they have over everything. Politics, media, culture, you name it.
They basically get to write the rules.
Pretty much.
Okay, so we've got exploitation, alienation, inequality. What's the 4th and final big problem with capitalism on Marx's list?
Instability.
Okay.
Marx believed that capitalism, just by its very nature, is prone to these cycles of boom and bust.
Oh.
Think about it, right? You have overproduction, you have markets getting saturated, economic crises.
Yeah.
These weren't just like glitches in the system for Marx, these were features.
So like the 2008 financial crisis or even some of the more recent economic downturns, those were all examples of this inherent instability baked right in, is what you're saying.
Exactly. And you know who always seems to bear the brunt of these economic shocks, right?
Let me guess. Not the folks at the top.
Bingo. It's the workers who lose their jobs, the families who are losing homes, the small businesses that go belly up.
Okay, so we've got Marx right back in the 19th century laying out these, I mean, they're pretty hefty problems with capitalism.
Yeah.
Exploitation, alienation, inequality, instability.
It's a lot.
It's kind of bleak when you lay it all out like that.
Okay.
So is this just like outdated doom and gloom, or does any of this actually hold up in our world, today?
That is the question, isn't it? And I think that's honestly, that's what makes diving into Marx so fascinating, even now.
Yeah.
Because while he was, like you said, writing way back when, this article you sent, it argues that a lot of the issues he was talking about are even more, I don't know, amplified or something.
Intensified.
Yeah, intensified in our globalized, tech-driven world.
Because we're so hyper-connected now, right? Like instant communication, global supply chains, all that. And yet the gap between the haves and have-nots seems wider than ever.
Exactly. And for Marx, remember, it always comes back to the nature of work.
Right. And think about how technology, which, I mean, he couldn't have even imagined, think about how it's changing things.
Yeah.
Automation is like taking jobs at this crazy rate. The gig economy is making everything so blurry. Are you an employee? Are you a contractor? It's like...
It's a whole different ballgame.
Totally. It's wild. It's almost like... And this is kind of a weird thing to say, but it's almost like we're watching some of his ideas play out.
Yeah.
But in ways he could never have even, predicted.
Right. But even if we accept, okay, these problems exist, where do we go from here? What do we do? Because Marx's big solution was a classless society.
Right.
Where the workers control the means of production.
Worker control, the big one.
But then, I mean, history has shown that in practice.
It's complicated, to say the least.
Right.
To say the least. And the article, to its credit, it doesn't shy away from that. It acknowledges the
messy reality.
Yes, the messy reality of trying to actually, build a Marxist state.
Okay, so where does that leave us? What's the takeaway for, our listeners who are, maybe grappling with some of these ideas? If a communist utopia isn't the answer, then what is?
I think the real value, honestly, of revisiting Marx today isn't about, finding all the answers in his work.
Yeah.
Right? It's more about using his ideas as a lens, a way to look at the world, to think critically about what's going on.
Okay.
Even if we don't agree with all his solutions, his analysis, his critique, it helps us articulate some of these feelings we have.
It's like he gives us the vocabulary to talk about things that are maybe hard to put into words.
Yes, like that feeling of being stuck, of being taken advantage of.
Right, right.
It's about, like, naming those things.
And asking those really tough questions.
Exactly. Like, if inequality is, like we were saying, baked into the system, then what are we willing to do about it?
Yeah.
You know, how can we possibly create a more just world, a fairer world, even if we're working within, the framework of a capitalist system?
Those are some heavy, heavy questions to end on.
They are.
But honestly, I think that's what this whole deep dive has been about.
I agree.
Not just like, here's what Marx said, but how does this connect to our lives?
Right now.
Yes, exactly.
So to everyone listening, consider this your, jumping off point.
Oh, I like that.
Right. Keep thinking, keep reading, keep having these conversations.
Yeah, don't just take our word for it.
Exactly. Because sometimes, and I think this deep dive has shown us this, sometimes the ideas that make us the most uncomfortable,
Yeah.
those are the ones we need to be talking about the most.
It's making us think in new ways.
Exactly.
And that's never a bad thing.
Never a bad thing.